Welcome, welcome, welcome. This is Peter Winick. I'm the founder and CEO of Thought Leadership Leverage, and you're joining us on the podcast today, which is Leveraging Thought Leadership. Today, my guest is Jared Kleinert. Jared is an interesting fellow. He's a serial entrepreneur. He's a TED speaker, an award-winning author. He's been named as USA Today's Most Connected Millennial and a champion for humanity by the UN and a delegate to President Obama's 2013 Global Entrepreneurship Summit. So I could go on and on with his other accomplishments because they're pretty long, but I want to sort of dive into it. So here we are. Welcome aboard, Jared. Thanks for coming.
Yeah, thank you for having me on your show. And, above all else, I'm just a casual, fun loving guy who uh, enjoys fun conversations.
Cool. Well, we'll see if we could do that. I think we can. So here you are, sort of in a place where you've accomplished a lot from a content authorship, speaker, thought leadership side. Tell us a little bit about how that happened. How much of it was sort of accidental or luck, and how much of it was deliberate in terms of the planning and all those sort of things?
Yeah, I think how you describe leveraging thought leadership in your own work and through your company is probably how I stumbled on all of this. And so you say, leveraging and then thought leadership, which means you have to build some sort of thought leadership before that. And, you turn ideas into businesses. You don't sort of,
Yep.
it's not the other way around. And so my journey starts when I'm 15 and I tried to start my first business when I was 15. Like anyone that starts a business at 15, it almost always goes poorly. And I made every mistake you could think of, from not having enough capital to not really knowing my competition at the time. The biggest mistake I made was poor mentor selection. And so I was trying to learn from people that weren't thought leaders in the space that I was trying to play in, which was education and technology and the startup world. And so
Okay.
I spent 6 months hanging out with this guy, trying to learn business from him. It turns out that he had spent time in prison for securities fraud on Wall Street way before I knew him, and hadn't necessarily disclosed that information to me until about 6 months into our relationship. And there's something to be said about people sort of doing their time after doing a crime and having a second chance. I certainly make plenty of mistakes on a daily basis,
Sure.
and try and make up for it. But after that was disclosed, I saw that there was a lot of poor integrity or low integrity moments in how we interacted. And I ran away from that and really
Sure.
focused on.
So we'll give you a pass on that because you're 15, so we'll let you
Sure.
ride that one. With making a poor decision at 15, we could talk for hours and have probably a separate podcast on the dumb decisions we've all done at 15. That might actually be fun.
No, but it
Some of
led
us,
me to a
some,
positive.
some of us did that before the social media. Some of us did that before social media, so we're more free to talk about it.
Right.
But let me ask you now. I would imagine one of the things you learn from that is, you need to learn from other people. You need to partner with other people, be that on the publishing side, be that on the speaking side, be that whatever it is. I would imagine one of the things that you've done now is instilled some sort of processes or methodologies to say, well, let me vet that person just a little bit because I like surprises when it's my birthday, but not so much when it comes to,
Right.
doing business with folks that didn't tell me they were in prison.
Yeah, so that really turned me on to screening people for integrity first and foremost, and that is integrity as an individual, as a person. Are they a good person, which you want to surround, put your family next to them, etc. But also integrity of their thought leadership, or of their knowledge in a space. And so, if you're relying on other people's feedback and input to make business decisions, like I want to learn from people who are world class at what they do, and I don't want to settle for anything less.
So, how does one do that? Because I think it's a great point, and I've seen this over and over again, where really smart people start to go down a path, and they might say, "I think I'd like to write a book. I think I'd like to be a speaker. I think I'd like whatever," and then they do what everybody else does, and they do some research, and all of a sudden, if you were to Google thinking about writing a book, there's 8,000 people that are willing to sort of air quote help you for money, right?
Right.
And how do you sort of, and there's some, like anything else, right? There's good, there's bad, and there's ugly, but it's a bit overwhelming, particularly if it's your first time down this path, right? That there's certain things that we know, hey, if we're going to go buy a car, here's how we would check out which car is better. If we're going to go buy a television, let's go get some reviews. But it's gets a little bit murky here. So how do you navigate that?
Yeah, I would agree with you, and that's why things like being a TED and TEDx speaker, being an award-winning author, getting the sort of press that I've gotten. If you're listening to this at home, this is part of why thought leadership is so important, and not just having thought leadership, but being recognized for your thought leadership in multiple ways. And so, first is having social proof or having media outlets that are saying you're good at what you do, having other organizations basically vouch for you through their brands. And so, even in this short intro that you gave me, I'm leveraging the brands of USA Today, TED,
Sure.
the United Nations, President Obama, and that gives me some sort of trustability or likability, or there's some understanding with your audience that I'm not completely full of shit. And
Right.
then there's also another element of it too, which is that you at home are being introduced to me and these concepts through Peter, and so there is a mutual trust that's being established here. I am being introduced to you, and I'm able to leverage the trust and intimacy that you have with Peter and that I have with Peter. And so we're starting our relationship from a much higher standpoint than if you just Googled me online. And so that's great.
There's a de facto. I just want to add a sort of a thread to that, Jared. There's a de facto endorsement, if you will, right? Because I try my best to have folks on the show that have something to add to the conversation, that are smart, that are willing to share, etc. And I hope that by having a fairly rigid screening process, that there's a little bit of a trust between not just you and I, which is important, but between myself and the audience, saying, "Hey, listen, if you're going to give me 20 minutes of your time, I'm going to bring you really interesting people." Right. And they're
Totally.
not used car salesmen. No offense to used car salesmen or Clint the Little. But that, so I think that's part of it. So I love what you said in terms of the USA Today, TED. I mean, those are not, Obama, right? Those are not, quote, brands that lend their shine lightly to others, right? So I know when I'm seeing a TED talk, now it doesn't mean I love every TED talk I've ever seen, but there's a certain caliber of thoughtfulness, a certain caliber of, wow, that's interesting. There's a certain set of expectations I'm going to have, that it's not going to be, a bad stand-up comic or something. So you have to meet that criteria. So yeah, I think that's a great point.
And I have really great news for you, and I have really bad news for you. The really good news is that this becomes exponentially easier as you build your network and as you amass some of this thought leadership and recognition of your thought leadership. The really bad news is it's also sort of like a house of cards situation where
Yes.
it might take you 5, 10, 20 years to build up your reputation, become a recognized thought leader, and then 5 or 10 minutes can go by and you say something really dumb, or you do something really wrong, and you don't get a second chance and you can't make up for it. And so that's why I'm increasingly obsessed with trying to do things the right way and then being mindful of how to course correct when I do make mistakes, because these relationships with other thought leaders, with publishers, with media, with all the different people in your network that will allow you to become a thought leader and become someone known as a subject matter expert, those relationships are really important, and playing the long game is really valuable. And I'm 23, so I haven't had all the time in the world to
Sure.
play the long game. But I think it's important, whether you're 23 or 32 or 65, to think about the long game, especially if you have ambitions of publishing traditional book deals, or if you have anything that you would be covering on this show.
Yeah, so let's talk about the long game a little bit, because I think that is really wise, right? So oftentimes people are, sort of transactional. Oh man, if I get a TEDx talk or a TED talk or get this article published on Forbes or whatever it is, the next day it'll be, rainbows and unicorns, and, I'll have paparazzi following me. I think that you're right, that it's incredibly hard to break into those. There's a reason the bar is very high, because you've got to have something to say, and you have to have good stuff to say, and there's plenty of other smart people out there. And I think by the time you're able to break through a handful of those, there's a bit of a flywheel effect. Like the ability to get
Totally.
your seventh placement is exponentially easier than your first one. The second one's a little bit easier than the first, the third one a little bit easier than the second, but you start getting into double digits. And not that I think easy is the wrong word, but much easier. So I love the concept of playing the long game because thought leadership as a business is a long game. Very, 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 very few people can get into this space as a quote get rich quick piece. You have to think about this, and I always tell my clients 3 to 5 year cycles. 3 to 5 year cycles. It's not going to happen overnight. So
Right.
give me a little bit of thought because given, and I love you're 23 and talking about the long game because that's awesome. So you've hit it on the TED side and you've had a best-selling book. Talk a little bit about the book and what that journey was like from sort of the light bulb going off in your head and then bunch of stuff happens and then it comes out. The bunch of stuff happens is what I'm interested in. Tell me about that.
Yeah. So if we're talking about the long game and you take nothing else from this conversation that Peter and I are having, the thing I would prescribe to you at home or at work is to build a world class network because who you know is going to determine what you know and what sort of thought leadership you're able to both share and research and access.
Yep.
But then it's also going to allow you to get these opportunities over time because it's other people that are going to write about you or other people that are going to sign those checks for those deals and or pick you to speak, etc. And so, you asked about how I got a book deal, how I got TED Talks, all that. It was really all through my network. And so I coming off of the negative mentor experience, I looked to Forbes actually and various other media outlets that were talking about other thought leaders and this was when I was
But oh wait,
16.
time out. So when you're 16, so I just want to because this is really interesting to me. Most 16-year
Sure.
olds, their networks are a bunch of 16-year-olds. Clearly, you didn't get to TED or get a book published because your 16-year-old friend said, let me go walk you into Random House. So there's a piece there where you had to, I'm assuming, and I want to hear about this, make a deliberate effort, strategy, et cetera, to develop a network that could be supportive of your objectives and goals. So tell me about that a little bit.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I was going to launch into, and it starts with being 16 and not just having a network of 16-year-olds, but having a negative network because the only person in the business world I knew was a former white collar convict and like had spent time in prison for like Wolf of Wall Street esque activities, and so I'm reading an article in Forbes and I'm trying to self educate on this,
Sure.
and you could access other thought leaders through this. You could have virtual mentors that
Yeah.
you never meet and learn from what they've put out. So that's really important to think about as a thought leader and as someone trying to access it. But I read an article about this gentleman specifically who is called the most connected man you don't know in Silicon Valley. And long story short, everyone in Silicon Valley who was a co-founder of companies like PayPal or people like Tim Ferriss, they all knew who this guy was. And he offered them overwhelming value and
Right.
hosted these really fun dinner parties. And so I just reached out to him. I sent him a cold email and ended up offering to work unpaid in exchange for his mentorship. And it was that one
Wait, but
connection and
time
my
out
my
there
willingness
because
to
hold on because
a lot of timeouts.
yeah, no, well, no, because the timeouts, you're throwing out gems and just sort of going over them quickly. So you reached out to this person who's an incredibly, whoever that person was, connected, valuable person. Now, most people would reach out and say, "Oh my God, could you do this for me? Could you do that for me? Oh, can I have a call? Could take, not in a selfish way, but oh my God, I want something from you."
Sure,
But what you said was brilliant. Was I offered to intern for free? I offered to, you were generous and you basically realized, listen, this equation isn't equal. He has, I have more to gain than he from this relationship. So what can I do to be thoughtful to do something? And it's not quid pro quo, but do something that would be beneficial to him because I'm sure you're not the only one emailing this connected person in the valley.
sure. And for another overwhelming gem, if I said that sort of building a world class network is the number one way to build thought leadership, in essence, the best way to build a network is a 3-step process, and so it's to be a good person, which means to have integrity in who you are and also what you do from a subject matter expertise standpoint, your craft. It's to provide value up front, and so it's to actively think about how to offer value to other people. And then the third is to focus those efforts on the right people, or in my case, they're super connectors, these well connected individuals. In your case, it may be your ideal clients, and so the right people is more subjective, but you want to be mindful of how you're spending your time and who you're trying to offer value to with your limited time. And so I focused it on this gentleman who, yes, he could offer me a lot of value compared to what I could offer him. But I led with the value I could give him, which was my time and my willingness to take my entrepreneurial energy and put it behind his company. Ended up spending 2 years working for him, going from unpaid intern to being an early team member at his startup, and
Very cool.
then helping on like marketing and sales, and doing everything except for coding, really. And it was that one connection that led to like 90% of my network today. And so I could literally map out how he brought me to a conference with someone like Evan Pagan, who's a legend in the online info product space. And when I went to an event with Evan, I met 150 people, many of whom were like New York Times bestselling authors, and so on and so forth. And then there's a lot to cover in that 7 year span
Yeah.
between emailing this guy and now, but that has provided me all the opportunities I will ever need, and then some. And so then it's a matter of continuing to refine your craft. It's a matter of building as many of those influential relationships as possible with the long game in
Yep.
mind. So, trying to offer value, not maybe asking for too much. If you ask for something and you don't get it, that's okay. Just keep offering value and come back to that relationship later on.
There's an empathy piece here, right? Because you get maybe enamored, whatever the word might be, to say, wow, if only I could meet so and so, man, what that person could do for me, man, the connections they can make. Like there's a little bit of, oh my, gaga over that, right? But I think what you need to do is flip it
Sure.
and say, okay, if I was that person and I'm really connected and I've got a ton of money and I've got, whatever, these great businesses or whatever, what could so and so, meaning you, possibly do for them, right? And I think that's really the part where you have to put the energy and effort in, because yes, maybe out of the kindness of their hearts or whatever, they'll speak to you for 20 minutes or make a connection here and there, but to really form a deep, meaningful, and going back to sort of your long game piece, it's got to be a little bit better than that. It's got to be a lot better than that. You've got to really differentiate amongst the 100 other inbound please do for me sort of query someone like that gets. So I love the thoughtfulness that you've put into this process and methodology.
Yeah, and leverage that as you're building your own thought leadership. Think about this. So when you're pitching someone at Forbes, for example, an editor there, think about how you can offer value to their audience, how you can make their life easy, et cetera, et cetera. And so maybe you give them 3 to 5 headline ideas. Maybe you write 2 or 3 articles to show them what you're capable of, and you offer to do something by the way of promoting the pieces when it goes out, so that they understand the value you can provide as a contributor. You have to make it easier for people to say yes to what you're asking. And that is true when you're building thought leadership and getting a column. If you're reaching out to literary agents, show them how you're going to work to make a successful book deal for them, and ultimately make them money. Same with an editor or publishing house. Show them how your book is going to be successful. Give them a marketing plan that you've really thought out in advance, and then you put the onus on them to say yes or no, or to take that next step, but you have been empathetic in the process.
This sounds like a lot more hard work and thoughtfulness than luck.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, so let's talk about that, right? Because a lot of people see folks that are out there in the space, authors and thought leaders, and say, "Oh, geez, my stuff's so much better. They just got lucky," or oh, that they had that one break or whatever. But I think what you're talking about here is you've got to be great at your craft. Period. Full stop. There's no shortcuts there. And you've got to work your tail off to make those around you that can accelerate your success successful. And you've got to do it every day and be thoughtful about it and not be afraid to put in the hard work. Luck is great, but serendipity is not a strategy.
Yeah, and I'm curious. You do this for a living, and so when people are coming to you and saying that they want to become a thought leader, you say that it's a 3 to 5 year outlook, and then what parts of that equation do you share with them to showcase how much work it is? I'd be curious to learn more.
Well, it's not so much that they're coming to us saying, "Hey, I'd like to be a thought leader." It's usually they are authors, thought leaders, and speakers at different stages of their career. Some of them are early on. Some of them are world renowned and already killing it, but looking to take it to a different level on the enterprise sale. So, to me, I think it's the way I would answer your question is everything's connected and start to think in systems. And the reason that I started the business that I started, which is focused on thought leaders and authors and speakers and such, is that the way the market has been serving them, in my humble opinion, is not efficient for the thought leader, right? So if
Right.
you're going to do a book deal, there's sort of the book industrial complex, and they're all good people, right? Whether they're agents and publishers and then non-traditional publishers and all that sort of stuff. But at the end of the day, all those people care about sort of different slices of the pie. So a book agent wants to get you a book deal. Then they have to go on to the next thing. They can't move in with you and stay with you for 2 years, right? A publisher wants you to sell books, period, right? But you as an author or a thought leader, and I think words matter. I think you need to say, listen, I'm going into the content business. And there's one stream that might be authorship. There's one stream that might be my speaker side. There's another stream that might be where I have developed a whole bucket of content that is applicable to this market, and I want to get it out into the corporate world. What's the underlying business models there? I've got content that I use for marketing purposes. For maybe I'm a contributor on Forbes or TEDx, but you have to sort of see how all those things play together and not treat them in a siloed and isolated way. Because when you think in terms of systems, then the connections between speaking and speaking in front of the right audiences to sell your solutions to the enterprises, and then getting books out to those people that read the books, that buy those things, it all becomes connected, and it becomes actually early on it's harder, but then it becomes really easier to make smart decisions because it's easier to say, wait, this serves my goals or it doesn't, or this serves my objectives or it doesn't, versus sort of being reactive and responding to requests or going down various rabbit holes.
Yeah, and I respect that because with my last or with my two books, and then looking at the business I currently run, they are related, but it certainly
Yep.
requires giving my customers, my readers, a bridge so that they don't have to leap from one activity to the other. Whereas I probably could have thought more strategically about the total roadmap that someone could go on with me, and how they can get from point A to point B. And so, don't get me wrong, I really love the books that I wrote. I think they are fantastic pieces of work. It was part of my tool for building a world class network because both books actually feature 75 top performing millennials, ranging from like founders of WordPress to Duolingo to Elite Daily to all
Very
these
cool.
major social media influencers, and that's 150 people across both books, and then all the different individuals who recommended the contributors and who helped promote the book. So I met hundreds of incredible folks through that journey. But these days, I run a mastermind group for established thought leaders and for seven-figure business owners that have bootstrapped their companies, who are visionary in some regard. And so some of my readers fit that mold, and some of my book contributors are certainly qualified for that group. But I have to then go to my readers and be like, hey, I have this thing that you may be interested in, as opposed to saying, here, the book leads directly into the course, leads directly into the mastermind group. And so it works still, but it definitely requires a little maneuvering.
Right, but I was going to say the content is the same DNA across all these different things that you're doing. So whether I read it in a book for 25 bucks or whatever, or ultimately become part of a mastery group at some extreme multiple of the $25 book number, it's got a different value prop, a different format, a different modality, a different set of expectations, where you'd say, well, why would someone pay, whatever, X thousands or tens of thousands of dollars to be in a mastery group when I can buy the book for 25? Well, it's a totally different game, even though the way I might have been exposed to you, the place I may have fallen in love with you is the book or an article. And I think that's the whole point, just keeping that connected and then really listening loudly to your followers and your audience and figuring out how to serve them in multiple ways. So this has been great, Jared. Unfortunately, we got to start to wrap it up here.
Sure.
As we start to close, you gave us lots of things to do in terms of being generous and being thoughtful and being strategic and willing to give more. Give us one or two, don't do's.
Oh, that's a good question. I would say don't take things personally. And so if you are reaching out to influential people and they don't answer your email, or they don't have time to connect with you right away, or even if you are sort of in a sales situation, you're selling a book, you're selling any product or service, and someone says no, don't take it personally. Maybe they are
Yep.
just really busy, or it's not the right time, or maybe they just need to better build a relationship with you. And so you can use that as
Sure.
an invitation to continue building and leveraging your thought leadership, establishing more social proof, continuing to build your network, and then circle back with them, or continue providing them value, and maybe they'll come back when they're ready, and you won't have to reach out to them; they'll come to you. And so, I mean, that's actually
Got
something
it.
I need to be telling myself today because entrepreneurship is hard, and I had quite a few rejection emails this morning in my inbox. So it's more for you at home, and definitely for me too. But that's one. And what's the second? Don't not listen to these podcasts and not reach out to the guests. And so if you haven't at this point reached out to Peter and you've heard like 3 of these episodes, then you should send Peter an email. Tell him that you appreciate this content and maybe ask him a question or offer some sort of value. Feel free to reach out to me. My email is jaredkleinert@gmail.com. So just JAREDKLEINERT@gmail.com. And I would love to hear from you. And so you'd be surprised at how many shows like this I go on, and I never hear from the person on the other side.
Right.
And it's I don't want to hear from people if they're just going to ask, and have zero interest
Right.
in
Right.
building relationship. But if there is
Right.
some genuine interest in having a continued conversation, then I welcome it and I would love it. And so that's the reason I do these sort of interviews and want to get out there.
Great.
And yeah, this is part of why you do it as well. I'm sure you want to hear
Exactly.
from your fans and people that keep getting value from this,
Exactly.
so that you keep doing it.
Exactly. Exactly. Well, this has been great. I appreciate all that you've shared. There's a lot here, a lot of unique perspective, and from playing the long game to being generous to being thoughtful. Lots and lots of really, really wise information. So I appreciate your time, and I have a feeling, given that you're playing the long game, you're going to be in this game for a long time, and I hope that you are. So best of luck with everything.
Yeah, thank you, and I appreciate you having me on your show.
To learn more about Thought Leadership Leverage, please visit our website at thoughtleadershipleverage.com. To reach me directly, feel free to email me at peter@thoughtleadershipleverage.com. And please subscribe to Leveraging Thought Leadership on iTunes or your favorite podcast app to get your weekly episode automatically.